One day before, they walked with God in the cool of the evening. One day after, they looked back and saw a flaming sword blocking the only home they had ever known. Adam now had dirt under his fingernails. Eve felt pains she never imagined existed. The Bible tells the fall in detail, but what came after, the actual survival outside of Eden, almost no one knows. Genesis 3 ends with cherubim and a sword that turned in every direction, guarding the way to the tree of life. Genesis 4 begins with Eve giving birth to Cain. Between these two moments exists an abyss of experiences that the biblical text doesn't detail, but which we can reconstruct through the clues left in Scripture, the geographical context, and what we know about primitive survival. The first step outside of Eden wasn't symbolic. It was physical, brutal, final. Adam and Eve didn't have prepared backpacks. They didn't have a map. They didn't have a destination. They only had the garments of skin that God had sewn for them. The first blood sacrifice in history, an animal killed to cover the shame of those who were supposed to live forever. And they had each other. Two human beings against an entire planet that now operated under completely different rules. The Garden of Eden, according to scholars who analyze the descriptions in Genesis 2, was located in a region where 4 rivers met. The Tigris and Euphrates still exist today, cutting through modern-day Iraq. The other 2, Pishon and Gihon, have disappeared or changed course over the millennia. But the region, known as Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, carries echoes of that lost paradise. When Adam and Eve were expelled, they didn't cross a magical portal to another dimension. They simply walked outside of a protected perimeter. And on the other side, the land was the same, but completely different. Inside Eden, the soil produced without effort. Outside it, God had declared in Genesis 3 verse 17, "Cursed is the ground because of you, thorns and thistles it shall produce for you. By the sweat of your brow you shall eat bread." This wasn't metaphor, it was the new physics of the universe. The first night outside the garden must have been the longest in human existence, not because the hours were different, but because for the first time Adam and Eve experienced something they didn't know, real fear. Inside Eden, there were no threatening predators. There was no cutting cold. There was no darkness hiding dangers. Now, every sound in the woods was a potential threat. Every shadow could be an animal they didn't know was dangerous or not. Eve probably didn't sleep. Adam probably tried to keep some kind of watch, even without knowing exactly what he was watching for. And when the sun rose, the same sun that illuminated Eden, it illuminated a world that seemed completely foreign. Hunger came first. In the garden, you just had to reach out your hand, ripe fruits, perfect, abundant. Now, Adam looked around and saw trees. Yes, but not the same ones. Some fruits were poisonous, others were too sour to eat, others simply didn't exist in that season. The knowledge they had, naming the animals, understanding creation, didn't include a survival manual for outside paradise. Every discovery was a risk. Imagine biting into an unknown fruit without knowing if it will nourish you or kill you. Imagine drinking water from a stream without knowing if it's contaminated. Imagine touching a plant and discovering through pain that it has venomous thorns. Adam and Eve's learning was written in scars, in stomach pains, in nights of fever without medicine. And then came thirst. The water in Eden flowed crystal clear, accessible, perfect. Outside it, finding potable water was a matter of life or death. They needed to learn to identify signs, greener vegetation indicating a nearby water table, sounds of hidden streams, animal tracks that led to springs. Every mistake could mean severe dehydration in a climate that, depending on the season, easily exceeded 40 degrees. But water also brought the first lesson in forced engineering. It wasn't enough to find water, it needed to be transported, stored, kept clean. Adam probably experimented with using large leaves as improvised containers and watched the water leak. He tried tree bark and saw it crack. Eventually, he discovered that certain hollow fruits, like wild gourds, could be emptied and dried in the sun, creating humanity's first canteens. Each solution required dozens of failed attempts, and while they fought against thirst and hunger, another reality imposed itself: the cold. Eden had perfect temperature, neither too hot nor too cold, a microclimate controlled by God himself for the comfort of his creatures. Outside there, seasons existed, and when the first winter came, weeks or months after the expulsion, depending on when it happened, Adam and Eve discovered what it was to shiver from cold. The skins God had made for them helped, but they weren't enough for freezing nights in the open. That's how they learned to build shelter. The first shelter probably wasn't a house, it was a cave found by chance. A natural space that offered protection against wind, rain, and predators. The mountains around Mesopotamia, in the regions that today correspond to Turkey and Iran, are full of rock formations with natural cavities. Adam and Eve didn't need to invent architecture yet. They just needed to find a roof. But caves have problems. They're damp, they're dark. Sometimes they're already occupied by animals that don't appreciate invaders. Adam must have quickly learned to check if a cave was empty before entering, and Eve must have learned that the stone floor, without insulation, stole heat from the body throughout the entire night. The solution came gradually. Dry leaves piled up as a mattress, branches covering the entrance to block wind, stones stacked, creating a rudimentary barrier. Each improvement was a step towards survival, but each step cost energy they barely had, and at some point during those first months, Eve noticed something different in her body. The morning nausea that wouldn't pass, the fatigue deeper than normal, the sensitivity in her breasts, the signs that women throughout all of human history would recognize instantly. But Eve had no mother to explain. She had no midwife to consult. She had no woman who had ever been through that. She was pregnant, and she had no idea what that meant. God had said still in Eden, "I will greatly multiply your pain and your conception. In pain you shall bring forth children." It was a prophetic sentence, but Eve had no context to understand its magnitude. She had never seen a birth. She had never felt a contraction. She had never experienced the pain that was to come. The following months were a brutal education about the female body, the belly growing, the movements inside her, life forming, moving, kicking, the growing difficulty in performing basic tasks. Bending down to gather food became impossible. Walking long distances became torture. The body she knew was transforming into something unrecognizable, and Adam couldn't help in the way she needed. He could fetch food, he could bring water, he could maintain the shelter, but he couldn't understand what she felt. He couldn't relieve the back pains. He couldn't explain if this was normal or if something was wrong. The two were completely alone in this experience. Cain's birth was probably the most terrifying day of Eve's life. The contractions beginning, pain different from anything she had ever felt. Waves that came and went, each time more intense, each time closer. Instinct saying something needed to come out of her, but fear screaming that this was impossible. There was no anesthesia, there was no doctor, there wasn't even a comfortable position. Eve probably clung to Adam, screamed until she lost her voice, pushed until she lost her strength. Hours and hours of labor without any guarantee it would end well. And then, a cry. Genesis 4, verse 1. Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, and said, "I have acquired a man with the help of the Lord." That phrase, "I have acquired a man with the help of the Lord," carries a weight that few people perceive. Eve recognized that she hadn't done it alone, that God, even after the expulsion, even after the curse, was still present, still helping, still caring. Cain was proof that life continued. that the world outside Eden was hostile, but not sterile, that God hadn't completely abandoned them. But raising a child without any reference is a challenge that defies imagination. Eve had no mother to ask about breastfeeding, about when to introduce solid foods, about why the baby cried and wouldn't stop, about fevers, about diarrhea, about the thousands of problems small children face. Every decision was an experiment. Every mistake could be fatal. And while Eve cared for Cain, Adam faced another monumental problem: feeding a family that now had 3 mouths. Hunting became a necessity. In Eden, there's no record of Adam killing animals to eat. The original diet seems to have been fruits, vegetables, grains. But outside paradise, with the earth producing thorns instead of abundance, animal protein became a matter of survival. But how do you hunt without weapons? Adam didn't have a bow, he didn't have a metal spear, he didn't have a net. He had hands, stones, and intelligence. The first hunting methods were brutally primitive: pit traps, holes covered with branches where animals would fall, stones thrown at smaller prey. Persistence hunting, running after an animal until it collapsed from exhaustion, something humans can do better than any other land predator because of our cooling system through sweat. Every hunt was a battle. Animals didn't want to die. They fought, they bit, they gored. Adam probably returned from many hunts injured, bleeding, sometimes with nothing to show for the effort. And successful hunts brought another challenge: what to do with the carcass. Raw meat spoils quickly. In hot weather, a matter of hours, Adam needed to discover preservation methods: drying in the sun, smoking over fire, salting if he could find natural salt deposits, and fire. That was another crucial milestone. The biblical text doesn't specify when humans mastered fire, but it's reasonable to assume it was early in the post-Eden experience. Fire changes everything. It warms during cold nights. It drives away predators who fear flames. It allows cooking food, destroying parasites and bacteria, making proteins more digestible. It allows illuminating the darkness that was previously dominated by fear. Discovering how to create fire was probably an accident. Sparks appearing when stones are struck a certain way. Friction generating heat when dry wood is spun against dry wood. Some moment of experimentation where smoke became ember, ember became flame, and flame became the most important tool of primitive humanity. Keeping the fire burning, however, was another story. Fire needs constant fuel. Dry wood, specifically, green wood releases too much smoke and not enough heat. Adam and Eve needed to learn to stockpile firewood, protect embers from rain, revive nearly dead fires. Losing the fire meant starting from scratch. Hours of work to get a single spark. And while they mastered these basic skills, the family grew. Genesis 4, verse 2. She again bore his brother Abel. Another birth, another experience of extreme pain. But this time, Eve had reference. She knew what to expect. She knew the pain would pass. She knew that in the end there would be life. The second child was probably easier, not easy, but less terrifying than the first. And now the family had 4 people, 4 mouths to feed, 4 bodies to shelter, 4 lives depending on the skills Adam and Eve developed in daily practice. The pressure increased as the children grew, because children consume resources but take years before they can contribute back. The boys grew up in worlds different from Eden. For Cain and Abel, thorns were normal. Hard work was the standard. Sweat and exhaustion were part of life from the beginning. They had no memory of the lost paradise. They didn't feel the same nostalgia that tormented their parents every time they looked in the direction where the flaming sword still turned. But Adam and Eve certainly told stories. At night, around the fire, the first couple must have narrated to their children what the garden was like. The fruits that grew without effort, the animals that didn't attack, the presence of God walking among the trees in the cool of the day, and the serpent, the forbidden tree, the choice that changed everything, These stories shaped the children in different ways. Cain became a tiller of the ground. Abel, a keeper of sheep. Two complementary professions, but which revealed distinct personalities. Cain fought against the cursed soil, trying to extract harvest from land that produced thorns. Abel cared for animals, working with living creatures instead of dead soil. And both learned about worship. At some point, Adam and Eve taught their children that God existed, that he deserved honor, that offerings should be brought to him. The concept of sacrifice, which Adam had seen when God killed animals to make the garments of skin, was transmitted to the next generation. Cain brought from the fruit of the ground an offering to the Lord. Abel brought from the firstborn of his flock and of their fat. The text of Genesis 4 says that the Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. Why the difference? The Bible doesn't explain in detail, but Hebrews 11 verse 4 offers a clue. By faith, Abel offered to God a greater sacrifice than Cain. The difference was in the attitude of the heart, not just the content of the offering. Abel brought the best, firstborn and fat. Cain brought simply from the fruit, without mention of it being the best, the first, the most valuable. God saw the heart, and Cain's heart was wrong. Cain's reaction to the divine rejection was anger, and his face fell. Instead of asking what to do differently, instead of seeking understanding, instead of repenting, Cain closed himself in anger. And God, in an act of mercy that is rarely noticed, came to speak with Cain directly. Genesis 4 verse 6, "Why are you angry? And why has your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin lies at the door, and its desire is for you, but you should rule over it." It was a second chance, a clear explanation, a promise that acceptance was possible if Cain changed. And a warning. Sin was waiting, wanting to dominate him, but he could resist. Cain didn't listen. What happened next was the first murder in human history. Cain spoke to Abel, his brother, and it came to pass, when they were in the field, that Cain rose up against Abel, his brother, and killed him. The violence that entered the world through disobedience in Eden now produced its most bitter fruit. A son of Adam and Eve killing another son of Adam and Eve. The blood of the first human being born of woman shed by the second human being born of woman. Imagine the moment when Adam and Eve found out. Maybe Cain came back alone. Maybe they found the body. Maybe God revealed it directly. The text doesn't specify. But at some point, the parents realized that one son was dead and the other was the killer. There's no word to describe this pain. Losing a child is devastating. Losing a child at the hands of another child is something that goes beyond any category of suffering. Eve, who had said, "I have acquired a man with the help of the Lord," when Cain was born, now saw that same man destroy the family she had built with so much sacrifice, and Cain was cursed. God declared, "The voice of your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground, and now you are cursed from the earth, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you till the ground, it shall no longer yield its strength to you. A fugitive and a vagabond, you shall be on the earth." The curse on Cain was an intensification of the original curse on Adam. The land that was already difficult for Adam would be impossible for Cain. He could no longer cultivate. He would be forced to wander without roots, without a permanent home. Cain responded, "My punishment is greater than I can bear." Some translate this phrase as, "My iniquity is greater than can be forgiven." Both readings are possible in Hebrew. Cain either recognized the gravity of his sin or complained about the severity of the consequence. Either way, he feared that anyone who found him would kill him. And here arises a question many ask. What other people? If Adam and Eve were the only humans, and Cain and Abel their only children mentioned up to that point, who was Cain afraid of? The answer is in Genesis 5 verse 4. The days of Adam after he begot Seth were 800 years, and he begot sons and daughters. Adam lived 930 years. During that time, he begot not only Cain, Abel, and Seth, but sons and daughters, plural, multiple, over centuries. By the time of Abel's murder, which may have happened decades after the births, there could already be many other people on earth. Brothers, sisters, nephews, cousins, all descendants of the first couple. Cain feared family vengeance, and God, even while judging Cain, offered protection. Whoever kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord set a mark on Cain, lest anyone finding him should kill him. Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod, east of Eden. There he built a city. He had descendants who developed music, metalworking, cattle raising. Cain's lineage was technologically innovative, but spiritually distant. Lamech, 5 generations later, boasted of having killed a man for wounding him, violence becoming normalized, intensifying. Meanwhile, Adam and Eve faced the deepest grief. Genesis 4, verse 25. Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and named him Seth. For she said, God has appointed another seed for me instead of Abel, whom Cain killed. Seth means granted or appointed. Eve saw in this son a divine replacement. Not that Seth erased Abel, but that God was restoring what violence had stolen. The promised lineage would continue, and it was through Seth that humanity found its way back to worship. Genesis 4, verse 26. To Seth also a son was born, and he named him Enosh. Then men began to call upon the name of the Lord. This phrase marks a turning point. In the generation of Enosh, Adam's grandson, collective worship of God became established in a more organized way. What Adam and Eve practiced as a family began to become something communal, structured, passed on as sacred tradition. And Adam saw all of this happen, 930 years of life, enough time to see Seth be born, grow up, have children, time to see Enosh, Kenan, Mahalalel, Jared, entire generations sprouting from the seed he planted. The text of Genesis 5 lists the genealogies in detail, showing that Adam was still alive when Lamech, Noah's father, was born. Adam knew his great-great-great-grandson many times removed. Imagine the weight of witnessing so much, the world filling with people, all carrying the consequences of his original choice. Violence spreading, idolatry arising, distance from God becoming the norm in some lineages while others maintained faith. And at some point during these centuries, Eve died. The Bible doesn't record her death or age. It simply goes silent about her after the birth of Seth. The mother of all the living, the woman who faced childbirth without any help, who lost one son to violence and another to exile, who rebuilt a family from nothing. This woman disappeared from the biblical record without an obituary. But her legacy remained in every human being who ever existed. Adam buried her somewhere in that land he knew so well. The first burial of a woman, the first time a husband had to say a permanent goodbye, the first widower in human history. And after Adam continued, more sons, more daughters, more generations, more teachings passed on about the garden, about the fall, about the promise. Because in the midst of all the curse, God had left a hope. Genesis 3, verse 15. I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. It was a cryptic promise spoken to the serpent in the presence of Adam and Eve. The seed of the woman, a specific descendant, not of the man but of the woman, would bruise the serpent's head. The serpent would bruise his heel, language of battle, of eventual victory, of reversal of what had been broken. Adam held on to this promise for 930 years. Each son that was born, he must have wondered, is this the one? Cain clearly wasn't. He became a murderer. Abel could have been, but was killed too early. Seth carried the lineage, but didn't fulfill the prophecy directly. Generation after generation, The promise remained unfulfilled. Adam died waiting. Genesis 5, verse 5. All the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. And he died. Two words that closed the life of the first man. The one who was formed from the dust of the ground returned to the dust of the ground. The sentence pronounced in Eden was completely fulfilled. For you are dust, and to dust you shall return. But the story didn't end with that death. Seth's lineage continued. Generations succeeded one another. The promise remained alive, passed from father to son, from grandfather to grandson. Someone would come, the seed of the woman, the one who would crush the serpent's head. 10 generations after Adam, Noah was born. And God looked at the earth and saw that wickedness had multiplied, that the imagination of the thoughts of the human heart was continually evil. The flood came. Humanity was almost wiped out. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord, and through him the promised lineage survived. More generations, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Judah, the promise narrowing, becoming more specific, from a woman, from a nation, from a tribe, from a family, until on a night in Bethlehem, 2,000 and some years after Adam had closed his eyes for the last time, a baby was born in a manger. The second Adam. Paul writes in Romans 5, "Therefore, just as through one man sin entered the world, and death through sin, and thus death spread to all men, because all sinned. But the free gift is not like the offense. For if by the one man's offense many died, much more the grace of God, and the gift by the grace of the one man, Jesus Christ, abounded to many. Where the first Adam failed, the second conquered. Where the first brought death, the second brought life. Where the first was expelled from the garden, the second entered a garden called Gethsemane, and voluntarily chose to drink the cup that the first Adam should have rejected. The serpent bruised his heel on the cross, nails piercing flesh, blood shed, death apparently victorious. But on the third day, the serpent's head was crushed. The resurrection proved that death didn't have the last word, that the curse pronounced in Eden was being reversed, that the way to the tree of life, blocked by cherubim and flaming sword, would be reopened. Revelation 22 describes the New Jerusalem. In the middle of its street and on either side of the river was the tree of life, and there shall be no more curse. The story that began with expulsion will end with restoration. The tree of life denied to Adam will be freely offered to all who overcome. The curse on the earth will be removed. The presence of God will walk again among humans, not in the cool of the evening in a limited garden, but for all eternity in a renewed creation. Adam lived 930 years carrying the weight of a choice. He saw children be born and die. He saw violence spread. He saw the world he helped break become even more broken. But God, still in Eden, had made a promise. The seed of the woman would crush the serpent's head. Adam died without seeing it happen. Generations passed, empires rose and fell, until in a stable in Bethlehem, the second Adam was born. Where the first failed, this one would conquer. Where the first brought death, this one would bring life. The same God who sewed skins to cover the shame of the first couple gave his own son to cover the shame of all humanity. The story of Adam and Eve didn't end at the expulsion. It ended at the cross.